So, 2024 was the year that I learned to love reading again. And in December, I read more books than I've ever read in any month ever. I read 7 books last month, and so today I'm going to review and rank each and every one. So, at number 7, on the bottom of the pyramid is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. So, in my notes here, I have emphasis on mid, which seems a little mean, but so just a heads up, I am going to be spoiling Midnight Library. I'm not spoiling any of the other books on this list, but I don't necessarily think that you need to go out and read this one, so here we go. In the Midnight Library, we follow Nora Seed, who, after an attempt on her own life, is magically transported to the Midnight Library. In the Midnight Library, every single book on the shelf is a different life that Nora could have lived. By reading these different books, she gets to step into different lives and see what her life would be like had she made different choices. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds like a really interesting premise. The issue is, they never really do anything interesting with that premise. Right from the very beginning of the novel, it's pretty clear what's gonna happen. Nora lays out every single regret she's ever had. She wishes she kept playing piano in a band. She wishes she followed through on her engagement. She wishes that she moved to Australia with her friend. And then we fall into the incredibly repetitive pattern of addressing each one of those regrets one by one by one. Each of these different lives she steps into, she's met with almost just comically horrible results. I think Carly Thorne mentioned this in her review of the book, but there is no subtlety at all. I mean, in the life where maybe she moved to Australia with her friend like she'd wanted to, everything's great, but her friend dies in a car crash. Or in the life where she kept playing piano, she was just so good at piano that her and her brother and their whole band became world famous rock stars. It is so famous, in fact, that her brother fucking dies of an overdose. None of that is her fault. And she brings up that fact. She gets back to the library and says, well, I mean, can I still live in the life where I moved to Australia, but things were just different enough that my friend doesn't get hit by a car? And the librarian's just like, no, doesn't work that way. Why not? So, on top of the book being really predictable and really repetitive, our POV character Nora is just so boring. I mean, it feels really mean to say that about a character who is struggling with depression, but she never gets more interesting. And because of the nature of the plot, where she's stepping into all of these different lives, we don't really have any other characters that stick around for us to be engaged with or for us to be invested in. So it's just us and Nora the whole time. Ultimately, I do really like the theming of the book. I like what it's trying to say. I like the idea that the life you're living right now really is your best life because it's yours and you can make what you want of it. I just really wish the book took a more interesting road to getting to that conclusion. Unfortunately, you kind of glean that from the first 12 or so pages, and so the rest of the book is a little bit of a slog, just reaffirming what was already made clear to the reader. Enjoyable, but I don't necessarily think anybody needs to read it. Midnight Library, for me, is a 2.75 out of 5. And it's worth noting at this point, too, that from this point on, it's a pretty big step up in quality. Midnight Library was the only book I read last month that I genuinely did not think very highly of. Every other book on this list, I enjoyed and I think you should read. At number 6, we have Funny Story by Emily Henry. I enjoyed this book quite a bit. It's really just a very fun, very cute, down-to-earth love story about 2 people dealing with a breakup. Our main character Daphne gets dumped right before her wedding. Her fiancé leaves her for his best friend, the girl you're not supposed to worry about. Freshly broken up with, she needs a place to live, and so she moves in with the homewrecker's now ex-boyfriend Miles. Romance ensues. Now, I had just a few minor gripes with this book. The first one is that the main character Daphne is a little bit of a wet blanket. It definitely gets better. About a third of the way through the book, she starts to come out of her shell and becomes a lot more interesting to follow, but I just wish that point came a little bit sooner. My main issue with Funny Story is that I just don't think I particularly jive with Emily Henry's writing style. I think the comparison I made to Carol is that it doesn't necessarily feel like reading a book, it feels like you're reading text messages from your friend who is an author. Emily Henry's writing style is ultimately one that's just very informal, and I don't think that in and of itself is a problem. I don't think that it's objectively wrong to write that way. It's just not my preferred style. I tend to like when an author has a really strong narrative voice and goes out of their way to write interesting and engaging prose. But I get that that's not for everybody. And so I'm not going to say that the writing in this book is bad by any means. It's just not necessarily to my taste. I will say though, there were a few lines that kind of had me rolling my eyes a little bit. Yeah, let's see. Okay, so Daphne is talking to her mom on the phone, and she says, "You were a realist." Her mom says, "Honey, I'm a cynic, and a cynic is a romantic who's too scared to hope." Did she really say that? So, despite these minor gripes, I still really did enjoy this book. I thought it was very cute, very sweet, and I did have a good time. I think a lot of that comes down to the characters. I find Daphne's love interest Miles really charming, personally, and I think the side characters add a lot of fun to the story. And thankfully, unlike in the Midnight Library, it's not just Daphne the whole time. Even though she starts off kind of boring, we have a really wonderful cast of side characters that kind of help bring out her personality and make her an engaging character to read by the end. And also, I found the characters really personally relatable. Daphne is a children's librarian, and Miles smokes a lot of weed and works at a wine bar, which, if any of you know us in real life, it's pretty relevant. So ultimately, I found Funny Story by Emily Henry to be a really fun read. I think if you're looking for something really deep with difficult themes and hard questions, this isn't necessarily what you're looking for. But if you're looking for something casual and fun to read, this is definitely a good choice. I really do think that everybody needs a couple of those books somewhere in their rotation. So if you're looking for one of those, try out Funny Story. So I give Funny Story by Emily Henry a 3.5 stars. She doesn't agree. She didn't like that book. So at number 5, we have The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin. So this is the first book that I read from absolute literary titan Ursula Le Guin, and I really enjoyed it. This is a sci-fi novel written in the 1960s that follows multiple POVs in a story about colonialism and resistance. So in this story, essentially, Earth has completely run out of its resources, and so has turned to this planet, which is completely covered by forest, in order to meet its demand for wood. So, not only are the humans exploiting the land of this planet, but also the indigenous species that live there, forcing them to work in the lumber mills and provide labor for the human colonists. Essentially, it is the same exact plot as Avatar or Disney's Pocahontas. Where I feel that this book really succeeds is in its theming. Unlike in Avatar or Pocahontas, there is no white savior aspect, and there is no both sidesing of the narrative. This story understands that violence in the face of colonialism is not a choice, but its natural consequence. Kind of making it a very radical, progressive story, not even just for the 1960s, but for today as well. I also quite enjoy the characters. We follow a few. One standout for me was Captain Davidson. He is an alpha space Chad, if you will. He essentially is the human colonist point of view. It's a little bit on the nose, but I really enjoy it. There's nothing he loves more than f***ing women and eating endangered animals. But don't worry, he has a sensitive side. He cries during the national anthem. Basically the ideal of a man. Additionally, this book employs really beautiful prose. I'll talk more about it later because, spoilers, there is another Ursula Le Guin book on this list, but just trust me, her writing's beautiful. The only things really keeping this book from being higher on the list is that, for one, that really, really beautiful prose, combined with the fact that this book is almost 60 years old at this point, means that it's not the world's easiest read, and its main issue for me is in its length. It is very short. It won the Hugo Award for Best Novella, so it is barely longer than a short story. What we have is really engaging, but because of its length, it's not able to really explore things too deeply or with very much subtlety. So even though I really liked what was there, I do wish that there was a little bit more going on. Even with that little bit we had though, the theming and the prose were so excellent that I do consider this a must read. The Word for World is Forest by Ursula Le Guin gets a 3.75 out of 5. At number 4 is The Martian by Andy Weir, which I already returned to the library. So, The Martian holds a very special place in my heart because it did get me out of a major reading slump. In this story, Mark Watney is an astronaut on a mission to Mars, and While on the surface, when his crew thinks he's dead, they accidentally leave him behind. What ensues is a story of Mark Watney trying to survive on Mars while the people back on Earth work to bring him home. The whole book is essentially just a series of problem-solving efforts on Mark's part to stay alive on a hostile world. And, it's kind of a blast. Mark Watney is just a really fun character to follow, and it's really enjoyable to just watch him try and improvise solutions to all the different problems that come up. Now, I will say, I think my like for this book is very subjective, because this book is very science heavy. A lot of the problems that come up, as well as their solutions, are very rooted in science and physics and chemistry. Personally, before I switched over to social sciences in college, I was a physics person, and even when I was a kid, I just really loved science, and so that kind of does it for me. But if that's not really your scene, I'm not sure you'll get the same enjoyment out of it that I did. So my biggest issue with The Martian is in its depth. What I'm really looking for in a book is the theming and the characters. I want to know what the book is really trying to say. What kind of questions is it asking? What is it really going to leave me with once I'm finished? And more importantly, how are those questions and how are those themes reflected in the actions and the changes of our characters? Martian doesn't really have any of that. There are no themes here. Mark Watney, he's fun. He's a fun guy, but he doesn't really have an arc. The Martian is very much an and then story. Something happens, and then something else happens, and then something else happens. But despite all of this, it's just a good time. It's just fun to read. It's the kind of book that you can crunch through in a single day, and I that's what I did. I absolutely, wholeheartedly recommend this book if anyone's looking to have a fun time with a survival, problem-solving story, and if you don't mind some science. I give The Martian a 3.75 out of 5. Coming in at number 3 is Normal People by Sally Rooney. Now, I really enjoyed this book, but it kind of took me a while to develop my thoughts on it. I changed how I felt about it quite a bit while I was reading, and even after I was finished reading. This is where it's landing today. Essentially, Normal People is a story about two very real, very flawed human beings just trying their best. We follow Irish heartthrobs Connell and Marianne, and we watch as they get into a fling in high school, and after that, the different ways that they kind of keep intersecting each other's lives. On the surface level, it would be really easy to just say that this book is a run-of-the-mill romance story. But as you read, it's revealed to you that it's really an intimate introspection about the way that our flaws that everybody really has, manifest themselves and how they can end up hurting the people we care about, whether we mean for them to or not. It's a character study about two normal people, all of their flaws intact. So, I could understand not liking this book. If you're the kind of person who just really can't jive with morally gray or difficult characters, even when the narrative is addressing them as such, you might not like this book. I liked it. I think that morally imperfect characters are the most interesting characters, especially when their imperfections and the ramifications of those imperfections are kind of the main theme of the book. To me, and I'm going to try not to spoil too much here, that theme and the significance of their characters really clicked with me with the ending. I'm not going to say what the ending is, but when I first read it, I kind of fucking hated it. But thinking on it, to me, the ending kind of recontextualized the whole story. This is not a feel-good romance where things work out because they're supposed to, and characters overcome their flaws because we want to see them together. It's ultimately just a really honest look at what those flaws and insecurities that all of us have can really lead to. It kind of reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Lady Bird, in that it's hard to really pin down what this book is about beyond just its characters. A person's life is not neatly divided into a 3-act structure. It's not there to teach you something, but it can cause you to ask questions and to introspect about your own life. I think Sally Rooney is a generational talent. She is an amazing author, and I loved reading this book. She does have one writing quirk that I've seen a lot of people talk about, in that she doesn't use quotation marks, which I'll admit is a weird choice, but I think you get used to it really quick. Ultimately, I am officially a Sally Rooney fan, and I am beyond excited to read more of her work. Normal People by Sally Rooney gets a 4 out of 5. At number 2, we have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Andy Weir, he returns. I thought this book was absolutely great. And no spoilers, because this book essentially is a mystery with a lot of really engaging twists and turns. But in this book, we follow schoolteacher Ryland Grace as he wakes up in a room with 2 dead bodies and no memory. Go. It quickly becomes clear that he is the sole survivor on a spaceship on a mission to save the Earth. So we follow our main character as he works to regain his memories and his sense of self, as well as just trying to survive. And if he manages both of those things, also maybe save the Earth. So not only is this book the same problem-solving fun as The Martian, at even higher stakes, but Andy Weir, he gave me what I asked for. This book has themes, it has characters. This book explores themes of responsibility, of friendship and platonic love, about our obligations to each other, about sacrifice. And by God, our main character actually has an arc. Now, granted, none of this is that deep. All of the themes are pretty basic, kind of surface level, and admittedly, our main character, Ryland Grace, is pretty much the same exact character as Mark Watney from The Martian. But just like in The Martian, it's a good time. I mean, it's all of that same really fun problem solving and engaging character work from The Martian, but with just more substance, more to chew on, more to think about, more to feel like you've accomplished by reading it. And, you know, I've seen a lot of people say that this book is the kind of book that you can recommend to anybody. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I kind of feel the same way about this as The Martian, where if you're anti-science, I mean, 1, get vaccinated, but 2, this might not be for you. But I really do think that if those themes, friendship and responsibility, and high survival stakes interest you at all, you should definitely read this book. I give Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir a 4.25 out of 5. Okay, friends, we're in it now. My number 1 book, my favorite book of December 2024, my favorite book of 2024 period. My favorite book I've read so far. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. Now, like I said, this was my favorite book, not just of the month, but of the year, maybe ever. It's a part of Ursula Le Guin's Hainish cycle, which is this kind of loosely connected sci-fi anthology series. Now, we follow the Envoy. He is a messenger from this cool anarchist space society as he endeavors politically to invite this perpetually winter-bound planet to join their society. Now, I am simply crazy about this book. My friends know, if you know me, if we talk, I've probably told you to read this book. The fact that this all takes place on an alien world allows Ursula Le Guin to really put a lens on social and political norms that we really take for granted. One of the primary ideas explored in this book is the notion of gender. Aside from the Envoy himself, who is a human being from Earth, every single person on this planet is completely androgynous. They have no concept of gender. So essentially, this book allows us to explore the concept of gender by presenting us with an entire world that knows nothing of it. It asks what a society with no gender looks like. What are the attitudes toward war when people aren't born feeling they're already classified into either a class of dominators or those to be dominated? Without a natural division of the sexes, what other ways will people choose to divide themselves? How many different ways can one whole people choose to divide themselves into arbitrary feuding halves? This is essentially a book about dualities, how they emerge, why one whole feels the need to divide itself into two. And it is absolutely brilliant. The world building in this book is beyond phenomenal. It is so vivid and all-encompassing. I mean, by the time you're done with this book, you genuinely feel like you've traveled somewhere completely foreign. And oh my god, Ursula Le Guin's writing is beyond phenomenal. There are simply not words to describe the beauty of this woman's prose. Her writing reminds me almost of Toni Morrison, just in the way that every line is poetry. Every single thing that she writes, regardless of its significance to the story or its characters, whether it's significant or not, is simply a joy to read. The way she crafts language is something that I really believe you need to experience. Genuinely, no matter what she's talking about, I'm just happy that she's talking. Kind of like the previous book of hers that we talked about, The Word for World is Forest. I could see that kind of language being a little alienating, and I do admit that I do wish this book was a little bit longer. I wish more things happened because I was really interested in the things that did happen. But if those are my only two complaints, I mean, come on. I absolutely love pretty much everything about this book. I mean, the characters, the writing, the world building, the themes, they are all just amazing. I found pretty much every topic explored in this book really intellectually and philosophically interesting, and one of the biggest topics it explores, gender and the lack of gender, I found really personally interesting and personally relatable. In my opinion, this is an absolute must-read for anybody who's looking to be challenged, anybody who wants to read beautiful writing, anybody who wants to read something and feel like they've learned something significant. You should absolutely read this book. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. 4.5 stars out of 5. My favorite book from last year, for sure. Whoa, 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 whoa! Thank you!